Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane, yet oddly fascinating world of capybaras, those oversized guinea pigs who've somehow convinced the entire animal kingdom that they're everyone's best friend. While social media makes them look like Zen masters of the wetlands, the truth is, capybaras live remarkably uneventful lives, spending their days doing pretty much the same three things on repeat, with the enthusiasm of someone stuck in the world's most relaxed traffic jam. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been in the world for exactly 3 weeks now, which in capybara terms makes you roughly equivalent to a teenager who thinks they know everything but keeps walking into glass doors. The South American wetlands stretch around you like nature's own lazy river system, complete with floating salad bars and an impressive collection of things that view you as a potential meal. Your education in survival begins with the most important lesson any young capybara can learn: how to look completely uninteresting while being secretly terrified. The morning sun filters through the canopy overhead, turning the water into a patchwork of golden shadow. You're paddling along what you optimistically call your route, but which is really just wherever the current decides to take you, when the water beside you begins to move in a way that suggests something large and unfriendly is thinking about making your acquaintance. A caiman surfaces approximately 6 feet to your left, rising from the depths with all the casual menace of a nightmare taking its time. It's roughly the size of a small boat, if small boats had eyes like obsidian marbles and enough teeth to staff a dental convention. Water streams off its prehistoric head as it regards you with the kind of patient interest a food critic might show, a potentially disappointing appetizer. You freeze. This is not a strategic freeze, this is pure, undiluted terror, wearing the disguise of tactical thinking. Every instinct you possess is screaming conflicting advice. Swim away too late, dive underwater, terrible idea, or perhaps try reasoning with it, even worse idea. Instead, you remain perfectly still, floating like a furry brown buoy that suddenly developed an urgent need to be somewhere else. The caiman yawns. It's not a small yawn, or a polite yawn. It's the kind of yawn that showcases exactly how many teeth evolution thought necessary for dismantling medium-sized mammals. You can practically count the dental work 42 teeth by your quick estimate, though admittedly you're not at your most accurate when experiencing existential dread. You both float there for what feels like several geological ages but is probably closer to 30 seconds. The caiman seems to be weighing its options: eat the weird floating rat thing, or save energy for something that might actually run away and make the chase interesting. You, meanwhile, are discovering that terror has a way of sharpening your ability to remain absolutely motionless while your mind races through every poor life choice that led to this moment. The caiman's eyes close halfway, not sleepy, but the sort of calculating half-lid that suggests it's running cost-benefit analyses on capybara consumption. You realize, in a moment of clarity that cuts through the panic, that you're actually witnessing a business decision in progress. After another eternal 30 seconds, the caiman apparently concludes that you're not worth the calories. It sinks back into the water with the same unhurried dignity it used to surface, disappearing like a bad dream that suddenly remembers it has somewhere else to be. You paddle away with all the grace and dignity of a furry potato that's just discovered it's somehow still alive. Your swimming technique, which already bore no resemblance to anything that could be called proper, deteriorates further into what can only be described as desperate, flailing with a side of gratitude. It's only when you reach the safety of a reed bed that you realize you've just passed your first major life exam, looking so utterly unremarkable that even a hungry predator couldn't be bothered. The caiman encounter has motivated you to upgrade your swimming technique from barely controlled drowning to something that might charitably be called aquatic competence. Your current method, which involves a lot of splashing, some involuntary prayer, and the kind of paddling motion that suggests you learn to swim by watching someone else drown, clearly needs work. You find a quiet backwater where the current is gentle and the probability of encountering anything with more teeth than you is relatively low. Time for some honest self-assessment. Your first revelation comes when you stop panicking long enough to notice that you're not actually sinking. In fact, you're remarkably buoyant, floating like nature designed you as a living flotation device. This is probably because you're essentially a furry barrel with legs, not the most elegant description, but functionally accurate. You experiment with different approaches, The frantic dog paddle that got you this far is exhausting and makes enough noise to announce your location to everything within a quarter-mile radius. The attempted breaststroke you saw a river otter performing looks graceful when she does it, but makes you look like you're trying to hug the water to death. After an hour of trial and error that would have been embarrassing if anyone had been watching, you stumble onto something that actually works. Instead of fighting the water, you lean into the fact that you're basically unsinkable. Long, slow strokes that work with your natural buoyancy rather than against it. Your webbed feet, which you'd previously considered mostly decorative, turn out to be surprisingly effective when used with purpose rather than panic. By afternoon, you've developed what could generously be called a swimming style. It's not fast, it's not particularly elegant, but it's quiet and sustainable, and it gets you where you need to go without advertising your presence to every predator in the vicinity. You're beginning to suspect that being a capybara might be less about being impressive and more about being effective in the most unremarkable way possible. Your third week of independent life coincides with what you'll later remember as the Great Grass Shortage, a period when every decent patch of aquatic vegetation seems to be occupied by larger, more established capybaras who have no interest in sharing with someone who still looks like they're figuring out how legs work. The premium real estate, those lovely floating mats of water hyacinth, and the tender young shoots that grow in the shallows, has been claimed by adults who've perfected the art of looking simultaneously relaxed and completely immovable. They occupy these spaces with the kind of casual authority that suggests they've never questioned their right to the best salad bar in the wetlands. You, meanwhile, are learning the hard way that being small and inexperienced puts you at the bottom of the wetland social hierarchy, somewhere between mildly tolerated and completely ignored. Your first attempt at claiming a decent feeding spot goes about as well as you'd expect. You approach a lovely patch of tender water lettuce, where a large male is methodically working his way through what appears to be nature's equivalent of a gourmet buffet. You clear your throat, or make the capybara equivalent of throat clearing, which is more of a soft grunt, and wait for him to acknowledge your presence. He doesn't look up, doesn't pause in his chewing, doesn't give any indication that he's registered your existence beyond a slight tightening around his eyes that suggests your presence is about as welcome as a mosquito at a meditation retreat. You wait. He continues eating with the kind of focused determination that makes it clear this patch of lettuce is his patch of lettuce, and your options are to find your own or spend the day watching him enjoy his lunch. After 20 minutes of standing there like a furry lawn ornament, you get the message. This is when you discover one of the fundamental truths of capybara existence. Sometimes the best grass isn't the grass everyone else wants. Sometimes it's the patch that looks unremarkable, tastes perfectly fine, and comes with the considerable advantage of being available. You find your salvation in what the other capybaras have apparently dismissed as boring grass, a section of cattail shoots that's perfectly edible, but lacks the obvious appeal of the floating gardens everyone else is fighting over. It's not gourmet dining, but it's yours, it's peaceful, and it comes with a view of the water that's actually rather pleasant once you stop comparing it to everyone else's lunch spot. As you settle into your modest meal, you realize you're learning something important about the art of not dying. Sometimes survival isn't about getting the best of everything. Sometimes it's about finding what's good enough and being content with that, while everyone else exhausts themselves competing for marginally better options. The wetlands you're beginning to discover operate on a complex social system that makes small-town gossip networks look simple and straightforward. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone has opinions about everyone else's business, and everyone seems to have appointed themselves as unofficial commentators on your progress as a functional capybara. Your first formal introduction to the local social scene comes courtesy of a family of caimans who've apparently decided you're more entertaining alive than dead. This is both reassuring and slightly insulting. You're glad to be off the menu, but being dismissed as not worth eating does interesting things to your self-esteem. The patriarch of this particular caiman clan, you mentally nickname him Big Jim because he has the patient, judgmental air of someone's grandfather who's seen everything twice, has taken to floating nearby during your morning swims. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough to make it clear he's keeping an eye on you. Still alive, I see, his expression seems to say as he watches you practice your swimming technique. Surprising, but not unpleasant. After a week of this casual surveillance, you realize that Big Jim and his family have essentially adopted you as their neighborhood entertainment. They're not planning to eat you, you're far too amusing for that, but they're deeply invested in seeing how long you can keep yourself alive through what they apparently consider a fascinating combination of luck and stubborn incompetence. Your second regular acquaintance is a toucan named Well. You don't know what he's actually named, but you think of him as commentary because he provides a running analysis of your life choices that's both helpful and deeply irritating. Oh, good. Commentary announces one morning as you approach your usual breakfast spot. The baby capybara is trying to eat like a grown-up again. This should be educational for all of us. Commentary has appointed himself as your unofficial life coach, offering observations like, you know, most capybaras don't need 3 tries to climb onto that log, and I've seen turtles with more decisive swimming styles, but I admire your persistence. The advice is actually useful, even if the delivery makes you want to find a rock to throw at him. Commentary has been watching capybaras for years, and his running commentary, irritating as it is, gives you insights into what you're doing wrong and how you might do it better. The third group in your expanding social circle is a troop of howler monkeys who've claimed the trees above your favorite resting spot. They regard you with the kind of amused superiority that suggests they view you as nature's answer to slapstick comedy. The monkeys provide a Greek chorus of commentary on your daily activities, chattering among themselves in what you're pretty sure are increasingly creative descriptions of your various fumbles and mishaps. When you misjudge a leap from the bank to a floating log and land in the water with all the grace of a dropped sack of potatoes, the monkey commentary reaches levels of excitement usually reserved for major sporting events. But here's what you're slowly beginning to understand. None of these critics actually want you to fail. Big Jim could eat you any time he chose, but he seems genuinely invested in your continued survival. Commentary's advice, however sarcastically delivered, is actually helping you become a more competent capybara. Even the monkeys, for all their laughter, are teaching you something important about not taking yourself too seriously. As your first month of independent life draws to a close, you're beginning to piece together something that might charitably be called a survival strategy, though it looks nothing like what you imagined heroic survival might involve. You're not the fastest swimmer in the wetlands that honor belongs to the river otters who move through water like furry missiles. You're not the smartest, the monkeys have that covered, along with opposable thumbs and the ability to throw things accurately. You're definitely not the most impressive. There are caimans in this neighborhood who've been perfecting the art of looking intimidating since before you were born. What you're discovering, is remarkably unremarkable. And in a wetlands ecosystem, where standing out can mean becoming someone's lunch, unremarkable is turning out to be a surprisingly effective survival trait. You're large enough that the smaller predators, the various fish and birds that might threaten a baby capybara, have moved you off their target list. But you're not so large that you represent a worthwhile challenge for the apex predators. You exist in a sweet spot of medium-sized mediocrity that makes you easy to overlook and hard to justify the energy expenditure of hunting. Your swimming style, while never going to win any awards for grace or speed, is quiet and efficient. You can travel considerable distances without making enough noise to attract attention, and your improved technique means you're no longer exhausted by the time you reach your destination. Your approach to food, finding the decent grass that everyone else has dismissed rather than fighting for the premium spots, means you're well fed without making enemies. Better yet, you're learning to identify new sources of good eating that the more established capybaras haven't discovered yet. Most importantly, you're developing the capybara superpower that will serve you well throughout your life. The ability to be present without being intrusive, to exist peacefully alongside other creatures without creating drama or competition. As you settle into your evening routine, a short swim to wash off the day's dust, followed by a peaceful dinner of cattail shoots and water lettuce, ending with a sunset float in your favorite quiet backwater, you realize that you've achieved something remarkable. You're still alive, you're reasonably well fed, and you've managed to establish yourself as a tolerated, if not beloved, member of the local ecosystem. In capybara terms, this constitutes a rousing success. The sun sets over the wetlands in a blaze of orange and pink that turns the water into liquid gold. Somewhere nearby, Big Jim surfaces for his evening patrol, nods in your direction with what might be approval, and disappears back into the depths. Commentary offers a final observation about your day's performance. Not terrible, all things considered. And the monkeys settle into their evening gossip session. You float peacefully in the warm water, listening to the gentle sounds of the wetlands preparing for night, and realize that you're exactly where you belong. Unremarkable, untroubled, and utterly content with the magnificent ordinariness of it all. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, to demonstrate your growing mastery of the art of not dying. But tonight, you're simply a young capybara who's figured out how to exist peacefully in the world, and that feels like quite enough. Adolescence arrives like a particularly persistent rainstorm gradually, then all at once, and with the kind of dramatic timing that suggests the universe has a sense of humor about these things. You wake up one morning to discover that your legs have apparently grown overnight. Your voice has developed an unfortunate tendency to crack at the worst possible moments, and your brain has somehow retained all your childhood fears, while simultaneously convincing you that you're now wise enough to ignore them. You're bigger now, definitely bigger than you were last month, but not quite big enough to command the automatic respect that size usually brings in capybara society. You exist in that awkward middle ground between harmless baby and respectable adult, which means you get neither the protective tolerance extended to the young, nor the deferential space given to the fully grown. It's roughly equivalent to being a teenager everywhere. Old enough to want independence, not quite competent enough to handle it gracefully, and constantly surprised by your own body's betrayal of your attempts to appear sophisticated. Your favorite lounging spot has served you well for the past 2 months. It's a partially submerged fallen log in a quiet backwater, positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun, while remaining close enough to good grass that you don't have to travel far for meals. The log has just enough texture to be comfortable, but not so much that it attracts the kind of small, biting insects that make relaxation impossible. In short, it's prime real estate, and you've grown fond of thinking of it as yours. This morning, however, you arrive to find it occupied. The occupier is a male roughly twice your size, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having had to question whether he belongs somewhere. He's stretched out along the full length of your log with the air of someone who's been doing this for years and sees no reason to change his routine now. You clear your throat, or attempt to. What comes out instead is a sound somewhere between a grunt and a squeak, your adolescent voice choosing this crucial moment to crack like a pubescent human, asking someone to prom. The older male doesn't even open his eyes. You try again, this time managing a more authoritative sound that you hope conveys something along the lines of, "Excuse me, but I believe you're in my spot." What it actually conveys, judging by his complete lack of response, is closer to, "Hello, I am a young capybara who is about to make a fool of himself." The male you mentally nickname him, Log Hog, shifts slightly, settling more firmly into what you've come to think of as your morning meditation position. It's not an aggressive movement exactly, but it has the unmistakable quality of a statement being made. This log belongs to whoever is large enough to claim it, and today, that's not you. What follows is perhaps the most passive-aggressive standoff in wetland history. You position yourself in the water nearby, close enough to make it clear that you're not conceding the territory, but not so close as to actually challenge Log Hog's occupation. Log Hog, for his part, settles in with the kind of determined relaxation that suggests he has nowhere else to be, and all day to prove it. Hour 1. You float nearby, trying to look casual while maintaining your claim to the area. Log Hog stretches, yawns, and begins what appears to be an elaborate grooming session designed to demonstrate just how comfortable he is. Hour 3. You've developed a crick in your neck from trying to look nonchalant while treading water. Log Hog has moved on to a systematic scratching routine that covers every part of his body he can reach, and several that require impressive flexibility. Hour 6. Commentary. The toucan arrives to provide running analysis. "Oh, this is excellent," he announces to the general vicinity. "We have ourselves a proper territorial dispute. The young one thinks persistence will win the day, while the old one is demonstrating the power of strategic laziness. My money's on the log remaining occupied until one of them dies of old age." By evening, you've both settled into what can only be described as competitive relaxation. You've found a partially submerged branch that allows you to rest while maintaining your vigil, while Log Hog has achieved what appears to be a state of zen-like motionlessness that makes him look like a very large, very content piece of wetland furniture. Day 2 brings rain, which Log Hog greets by positioning himself to take maximum advantage of the natural shower, while somehow making it clear that weather is just another amenity provided by his superior real estate choice. You huddle under a nearby overhanging branch, getting progressively more damp and irritated while trying to maintain the appearance of someone who chose to be wet. By day 3, the standoff has attracted spectators. A family of caimans has taken to floating nearby with the air of audience members waiting for the next act. The monkeys have appointed themselves as color commentators, providing a running soundtrack of what you're pretty sure are increasingly creative descriptions of your respective stubbornness levels. It's during the afternoon of day 3 that Log Hog makes his fatal error. He sighs. Not just any sigh, a deep, dramatic sigh that manages to convey boredom, superiority, and a slight suggestion that this entire situation is beneath his dignity. It's a masterful sigh, the kind that comes from years of perfecting the art of looking supremely unbothered while actually being mildly annoyed. The problem is, you've just perfected that exact same sigh. You respond with your own sigh, matching his tone and adding just the slightest hint of your own superiority. Loghog's eyes open slightly the first acknowledgement he's given that you exist. He sighs again, deeper this time, with overtones of weary patience. You sigh back, this time managing to convey the impression that you have all the time in the world and are actually enjoying this ridiculous situation. What follows is a 15-minute symphony of competitive sighing that draws every animal within earshot. It's perhaps the most civilized expression of territorial aggression in the history of the wetlands, and it ends only when Loghog apparently realizes that he's engaged in a sighing contest with someone half his size, and decides that winning isn't worth the damage to his dignity. He rises from the log with the kind of elaborate casualness that suggests leaving was always part of his plan, stretches with theatrical thoroughness, and wanders off toward what you're certain is a backup lounging spot that's probably just as good as yours. You wait a full 10 minutes before claiming your log, just to be sure this isn't some sort of tactical retreat. When you finally settle into your familiar spot, the log feels exactly as comfortable as it did 3 days ago, with the added satisfaction of having been properly defended. Commentary flies over to offer his analysis. Not bad for a youngster, though I should point out that Loghog has 3 other spots just as good as this one, and he was probably just testing whether you had the spine to stick it out. Consider it a passing grade in advanced stubbornness. Love, as it turns out, makes you even more awkward than adolescence alone managed to accomplish. This becomes painfully clear the morning you first see her. A sleek female, roughly your age, who moves through the water with the kind of effortless grace that makes your own swimming technique look like a masterclass in controlled flailing. She's beautiful in that particular capybara way that has nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with perfect competence. When she swims, she doesn't fight the water. She negotiates with it. When she climbs onto a log, she doesn't scramble and slip like you do. She flows upward like water, finding its level. Even her eating has a meditative quality that makes your own somewhat frantic grass consumption look like the work of an amateur. You're instantly, hopelessly smitten. Your approach to courtship, such as it is, involves what you believe to be subtle observation from a respectful distance. What it actually involves is following her around the wetlands like a furry stalker, while maintaining what you're convinced is mysterious invisibility, but which is actually just uncomfortably obvious. You begin each day by locating her morning swimming route and positioning yourself along what you calculate to be a casual intersection point. The fact that she takes a different route each morning, and that your calculations consistently place you in spots she passed 20 minutes ago, doesn't immediately deter you. You're operating on the romantic principle that persistence and good intentions will eventually overcome poor execution. Your swimming, already the weakest aspect of your skill set, deteriorates further under the pressure of trying to look impressive. In your eagerness to demonstrate your aquatic prowess, you've somehow managed to develop a stroke that combines the worst elements of every swimming technique you've ever attempted, creating something that looks like you're either trying to hug the water to death or engaged in some sort of elaborate interpretive dance about drowning. The morning you decide to impress her with your improved diving skills, a talent you don't actually possess, you manage to belly flop so spectacularly that the splash sends a family of sleeping ducks into startled flight. She glances over with what might be mild concern for your well-being, and you attempt a casual wave that nearly causes you to sink. Smooth. Commentary observes from a nearby branch. I've seen mating displays before, but never one that looked like it might require emergency intervention. Your attempts at direct interaction fare no better. The day you finally work up the courage to share the same feeding area, you spend so much mental energy trying to eat gracefully that you accidentally consume a considerable amount of mud along with your water lettuce. She watches with what you desperately hope is hidden admiration, but suspect might be mild horror as you attempt to subtly spit out the worst of the sediment while maintaining casual conversation. Nice weather, you manage, your voice cracking on both words. Yes, she agrees, demonstrating the kind of effortless politeness that makes your conversational efforts sound like they're being performed by someone who learned social interaction from a poorly written instruction manual. The conversation dies there, murdered by your inability to think of a follow-up that doesn't involve either the weather, already covered, or your various recent mishaps. Definitely not impressive. She finishes her meal with the same graceful efficiency she brings to everything else, and glides away, leaving you to contemplate the conversational wreckage. It takes you several weeks to realize that your mysterious, unattainable love interest has been perfectly aware of your attention from the beginning and has been politely managing your crush with the kind of gentle kindness usually reserved for small children and the mentally impaired. This realization comes the morning you arrive at what you've calculated should be another casual intersection point, only to find her waiting there with the air of someone who's decided it's time to address an ongoing situation. "You've been following me," she says, not accusingly, but with the tone of someone stating an obvious fact. Your voice cracks spectacularly as you attempt to deny this. "Following? No, I've just been. We just happen to. Similar routes." She waits patiently while you work through what might charitably be called an explanation, but which sounds more like verbal flailing. When you finally run out of words, she nods thoughtfully. "You seem nice," she says, which in the complex social language of Capybara, romance is roughly equivalent to, "I like you as a friend, but you might want to work on being a little less obvious about it." And with that gentle devastation, she swims away, leaving you to float in the water contemplating the smoking ruins of your first romantic campaign. Commentary, who has apparently been watching this entire exchange, offers his analysis. "Well, that could have gone worse. She could have laughed." The dry season arrives with the subtlety of a slowly deflating balloon, gradual at first, then suddenly and dramatically obvious. Water levels that seemed stable yesterday are noticeably lower today, and the lazy rivers that made up your neighborhood begin to reveal muddy banks you didn't know existed. This presents you with a crisis of mobility that your adolescent brain is not entirely equipped to handle. Your entire world has been designed around the assumption that you can always swim from point A to point B, with perhaps a brief waddle across a convenient sandbar. The idea of actual overland travel walking across open ground like some sort of land mammal is both foreign and mildly terrifying. The morning you wake up to discover that your usual route to the good grass involves crossing 50 yards of exposed mudflat, you seriously consider the possibility of just staying where you are until the rains return. This plan has the advantage of requiring no adaptation to new circumstances, but the significant drawback of likely resulting in starvation. Your first attempt at terrestrial navigation goes about as well as you'd expect from someone whose previous land travel experience has been limited to brief waddles between adjacent pools. You approach the mudflat with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for dental surgery, only to discover that your feet, perfectly designed for swimming and adequate for walking on firm ground, have approximately the same relationship with mud that ice skates have with quicksand. Your right front foot disappears into the mud with a discouragingly wet sound, followed immediately by your left rear foot. Within moments, you're executing what can only be described as the most pathetic struggle in the history of wetland. Travel too stuck to move forward efficiently, too proud to call for help, too inexperienced to know how to extract yourself with dignity. This is how you meet your first helpful bird. She's a cattle egret with the practical air of someone who's seen this exact situation many times before and has developed a standard rescue protocol. She lands on your back without ceremony and begins issuing instructions with the authority of a small, white-feathered drill sergeant. "Stop struggling, you're just making it worse," she announces. "Rock back and forth gently to break the suction. Use your back feet to push while you pull with your front, and next time, test each step before you commit your full weight." Under her guidance, you manage to extract yourself from what was threatening to become a very embarrassing grave. By the time you reach solid ground, you're covered in mud from chest to toe, and have learned more about the physics of suction than you ever wanted to know. "Thank you," you manage, once you've regained enough dignity to speak. "Don't mention it," she replies, though you might want to mention it to other young capybaras. This happens every dry season, and it's always the ones who think they can just power through the mud instead of learning to read it. The egret you mentally nickname her, Professor Practical, becomes your unofficial guide to dry season survival. Over the following weeks, she teaches you the art of overland travel, how to read ground conditions from a distance, how to distribute your weight to avoid sinking, and most importantly, how to identify the paths that larger animals have already tested. "See those caiman tracks?" she points out during one of your lessons. "They're heavier than you and have been making this trip daily for weeks. Follow their route, it's guaranteed to support your weight." You also learn the strategic value of the tactical freeze when caught in open ground. The first time you attempt to cross a large mudflat and spot a hawk circling overhead, your instinct is to run a terrible idea that would involve more splashing, more noise, and probably more sinking. Instead, Professor Practical's training kicks in. Freeze, assess, become landscape. You sink into your most convincing impression of a muddy rock and wait. The hawk circles twice, apparently decides that whatever you are isn't worth investigating, and moves on. You complete the crossing at your own pace, invisible through the simple expedient of being too boring to notice. By the end of the dry season, you've mastered what you privately call terrestrial competence, not grace, certainly, but a solid understanding of how to get from one shrinking pool to another without requiring rescue or becoming someone's lunch. You've learned to read the landscape like a map, identifying the safe routes and the dangerous shortcuts with the kind of practical knowledge that comes from making mistakes and learning from them. More importantly, you've discovered that the dry season, for all its challenges, has its own quiet beauty. The receding waters reveal hidden landscapes, ancient riverbeds carved into elegant curves, secret springs that only appear when the water table drops, isolated pools that become temporary kingdoms for whatever creatures are lucky enough to claim them. With your mobility issues resolved and your romantic education temporarily on hold, you turn your attention to the complex social dynamics that govern capybara society. What you discover is a hierarchy so subtle and sophisticated that it takes you weeks to realize it exists at all. Traditional animal hierarchies are based on obvious things like size, strength, or the ability to make intimidating noises. Capybara social structure, however, operates on entirely different principles. Who can look the most unbothered while doing absolutely nothing, and who has perfected the art of being present without creating any sort of disturbance. The alpha male of your local group, a magnificent specimen you mentally nickname the Buddha, has achieved a level of serene authority that makes everyone else's attempts at dominance look like amateur theatre. He doesn't enforce his position through aggression or intimidation. He simply exists with such perfect capybaraness that other capybaras naturally defer to his superior mastery of the art of being. Watching the Buddha operate is like watching a masterclass in leadership through supreme indifference. When conflicts arise, disputes over feeding areas, disagreements about the best sunbathing spots, he doesn't intervene directly. He simply positions himself nearby and radiates an aura of such profound calm that everyone else feels slightly embarrassed about making a fuss. Your position in this hierarchy, you gradually realize, is somewhere in the lower middle tier, roughly equivalent to promising student with potential, but still prone to making rookie mistakes. You're no longer at the bottom. That spot belongs to the truly young capybaras, who haven't yet learned that splashing is not an acceptable form of self-expression, but you're definitely not ready for the upper levels reserved for those who've achieved true mastery. Your first attempt to claim a higher social position goes predictably wrong. Inspired by watching the Buddha's effortless authority, you decide to try establishing yourself as a presence worth respecting. Your chosen method involves positioning yourself prominently in the morning gathering area and attempting to project an aura of wise serenity. What you actually project, judging by the amused glances you receive, is more along the lines of young capybara pretending to be important while trying not to look like he's pretending to be important. Your downfall comes when you decide to demonstrate your new status by approaching the Buddha's traditional scratching tree. Not to challenge him, you tell yourself, just to show that you're confident enough to share the same general area as the alpha male. The tree in question is a perfectly positioned specimen with just the right bark texture for a satisfying scratch and strategic placement that offers both sun exposure and quick water access. The Buddha uses it for his morning routine, an elaborate ritual of stretching and grooming that somehow manages to look both casual and ceremonial. You approach during his scheduled tree time, position yourself at what you calculate to be a respectful distance, and begin your own scratching routine. Your plan is to demonstrate that you're relaxed enough in the Buddha's presence to perform normal maintenance activities, thereby establishing your social confidence. The problem is that your scratching technique, while effective, lacks the meditative quality that the Buddha brings to the activity. Where he performs slow, deliberate movements that suggest scratching as a form of moving meditation, you attack the tree bark with the kind of vigorous enthusiasm that makes it clear you're trying to accomplish something, rather than simply being present for the experience. The Buddha pauses in his routine, not stopping. Exactly, but introducing a quality of attention that makes it clear he's noticed your presence. He turns slightly and regards you with the kind of patient interest usually reserved for small children who are about to learn an important lesson. What follows is the most educational 5 minutes of your adolescent life. Without saying anything, capybaras rarely need to say anything to make their points. The Buddha proceeds to demonstrate the difference between scratching like someone who belongs at this tree and scratching like someone who's trying to prove he belongs at this tree. His movements become even more deliberate, even more graceful, transforming what you thought was casual maintenance into something approaching performance art. The message is clear. You're welcome to use the tree, but perhaps you might consider approaching it with the respect it deserves, and with the understanding that belonging somewhere isn't about claiming space, it's about inhabiting space with appropriate reverence. You adjust your technique, slowing down, focusing on the scratching itself rather than on what the scratching is supposed to accomplish. After a few minutes, the Buddha nods slightly, the capybara equivalent of better, keep practicing, and returns to his own routine. As you both work on your respective maintenance activities, you realize you've just received your first graduate-level lesson in capybara social dynamics. Hierarchy isn't about who can do what, where. It's about who understands how to do everything with the appropriate level of presence and respect. By the time you leave the tree, your scratching technique has improved dramatically, and your understanding of your place in the social order has shifted from trying to climb the ladder to learning to inhabit whatever rung you're currently on with complete competence. Commentary, who has apparently witnessed this entire exchange, offers his analysis. Not bad. The Buddha could have made that lesson much more embarrassing, but he seems to think you have potential. My advice? Work on your presence before you worry about your position. As the sun sets on another day of education in the fine art of being an adolescent capybara, you settle into your evening routine with a new appreciation for the complexity of what you'd previously thought was a simple life. Every interaction is a lesson, every mistake is data, and every small success is a step toward the kind of effortless competence that makes capybara society function so smoothly. You're still awkward, still learning, still prone to the kind of mistakes that make experienced adults exchange knowing glances, but you're beginning to understand that awkwardness is just the price of education, and that even the Buddha was probably once a teenager who tried too hard and learned from the experience. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate your growing understanding of what it means to be a capybara in good standing. Tonight, you float peacefully in the warm water, listening to the gentle sounds of the wetlands settling into the evening, and feel the quiet satisfaction of someone who's beginning to figure out how to exist successfully in the world. You wake up one morning and realize, with the kind of quiet satisfaction usually reserved for solving complex puzzles, that you've become exactly what you always admired in the older capybaras: unflappable, competent, and possessed of that particular quality that makes other animals feel slightly better about life just by being in your general vicinity. It's not that you've gotten dramatically larger, though you have filled out considerably, or that you've suddenly developed impressive new skills. It's more that you've achieved a kind of gravitational presence, a calm authority that draws others into your orbit without any apparent effort on your part. Birds land on your back without asking permission. Smaller mammals use you as a stepping stone to better feeding areas. Even the caimans, those ancient arbiters of wetland respect, acknowledge your passage with the kind of subtle nod usually reserved for established neighbors. You've reached peak capybara, that enviable state where existing peacefully has somehow transformed into a form of leadership, and where your greatest accomplishment is making everything around you feel more settled and reasonable. The moment arrives, as these moments do, without fanfare or obvious significance. You're making your regular morning circuit of the wetlands when you spot it. A small island positioned perfectly in the middle of a quiet lagoon, with excellent grass, ideal sun exposure, and a single large tree that provides exactly the right amount of shade for contemplative pauses. It's prime real estate by any standard, the kind of territory that represents the capybara equivalent of a penthouse apartment with a view. The fact that it's currently occupied by an aging male who clearly has no intention of giving it up presents what might charitably be called a challenge. The current occupant, you mentally nickname him, the senator for his distinguished grey whiskers and air of established authority, has clearly been perfecting the art of territorial possession for decades. He occupies the island with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having had his claim seriously challenged, and he greets your obvious interest with the patient amusement of someone watching a child attempt something adorably impossible. What follows is perhaps the most civilized real estate negotiation in the history of the wetlands. You begin by establishing a presence in the general area not close enough to be threatening, but near enough to make it clear that you're not just passing through. You take up residence on a partially submerged log about 20 yards from the island's shore and proceed to demonstrate your own mastery of the art of existing meaningfully in space. The senator observes this development with the mild interest of someone watching a moderately entertaining performance. He doesn't acknowledge your presence directly, but his morning routine becomes slightly more elaborate, as if he's subtly reminding you of exactly what you're aspiring to claim. Day 1 involves what can only be described as competitive relaxation. You both spend the day demonstrating your respective abilities to look completely unbothered while maintaining perfect awareness of the other's activities. The senator's technique involves long periods of motionless contemplation, punctuated by brief, precise movements that somehow manage to look both casual and ceremonial. Your approach focuses on projecting calm confidence, while trying not to let on that you're actually quite nervous about the entire enterprise. By evening, a small audience has gathered. Commentary the toucan has taken up residence in a nearby tree, providing running analysis to anyone within earshot. A family of caimans floats at a respectful distance, apparently viewing the proceedings as their entertainment for the week. Even some of the local monkeys have paused their usual business to observe what they clearly recognize as a significant event in the local social hierarchy. Day 2 brings the introduction of subtle psychological warfare. The senator begins incorporating elaborate stretching routines that showcase his familiarity with every square inch of the island. He knows exactly which spots provide the best footing, which areas catch the morning light most favorably, and how to position himself to take advantage of the prevailing breezes. It's a masterful display of territorial knowledge that makes it clear he's not just occupying this space, he's inhabiting it with complete understanding. You respond by demonstrating your own territorial competence, though necessarily from a distance. Your log becomes the stage for an exhibition of advanced capybara techniques. Precise temperature management through strategic positioning, efficient feeding that minimizes energy expenditure, and swimming approaches that showcase your mastery of water navigation. You're essentially presenting your credentials as someone qualified to manage premium wetland real estate. Day 3 introduces the element that will ultimately decide the contest: the art of supreme indifference to outcomes. This is where your adolescent experiences with Log Hog prove invaluable. You've learned that the highest level of capybara territorial negotiation involves caring deeply about the result while appearing completely indifferent to whether you get it. The senator, clearly a master of this technique, spends the morning demonstrating his utter lack of concern about your continued presence by pointedly ignoring you while somehow making it clear that he's aware of your every movement. Your counter-strategy involves achieving what you privately call meditation-level indifference, a state where you're genuinely relaxed about the outcome while remaining perfectly positioned to take advantage of any opportunity that might arise. It's the kind of advanced psychological technique that requires you to simultaneously care and not care, to be prepared for action while maintaining complete stillness. The turning point comes when the senator makes a crucial error. He sighs. It's not a dramatic sigh, or even a particularly meaningful sigh. It's just a small exhalation that suggests he's getting slightly tired of the entire situation. But in the context of a 3-day territorial standoff, even the smallest sign of impatience represents a crack in the facade of supreme indifference. You don't respond to the sigh directly, that would be amateur hour. Instead, you shift slightly on your log, a movement so subtle it could be interpreted as natural adjustment, but which somehow manages to convey complete contentment with your current situation and absolute willingness to continue indefinitely. The senator notices. His eyes narrow slightly as he recalculates the situation, apparently realizing that he's dealing with someone who has genuinely mastered the art of patient persistence. What happens next is so graceful it almost looks choreographed. The senator rises from his favorite spot, stretches with elaborate casualness, and takes a slow tour of the island. It's clearly a farewell tour, though he manages to make it look like a routine inspection. When he reaches the water's edge, he pauses and looks directly at you for the first time in 3 days. The look contains multitudes: acknowledgement of your competence, respect for your patience, and a subtle suggestion that you'd better be worthy of what you're about to inherit. It's the capybara equivalent of a formal transfer of authority, conducted entirely through meaningful eye contact. He slides into the water with the dignified grace of someone whose territorial tenure has come to a natural conclusion, and swims away toward what you're certain is a perfectly adequate backup location that he's probably had prepared for exactly this scenario. You wait a full 30 minutes before swimming to your new island, partly out of respect for the senator's departure, but mostly because claiming your prize too eagerly would undermine the entire performance. When you finally haul yourself onto the shore, the island feels exactly right, not because it's objectively superior to other locations, but because you've earned it through the proper application of capybara territorial philosophy. Commentary flies over to offer his analysis. Masterfully done. The senator could have made that much more difficult, but he clearly recognized a worthy successor. Word of advice: Now that you've got it, you'll need to defend it with the same patience you used to claim it. Your new island comes with amenities you hadn't anticipated, the most significant being a troop of howler monkeys who have apparently decided that your back represents the ideal highway system for their daily commute between feeding areas. The relationship begins innocently enough. A single monkey, apparently testing a theory about capybara tolerance levels, uses you as a stepping stone during your morning sun session. You're too relaxed to object, and he's too efficient to be annoying, so the interaction passes without incident. By the end of the week, however, you've somehow become the central hub of a complex transportation network that serves the entire troop. Your back has been designated as a mandatory stopping point on routes between the fruit trees on the mainland and the nut-bearing palms on the far side of the lagoon. You wake up each morning to discover you've been scheduled for duties you never agreed to perform. The monkeys have developed what can only be described as a commuter mentality about your services. They arrive at your island with the expectation that you'll be positioned appropriately for their travel needs, and they've begun expressing dissatisfaction when your location doesn't align with their preferred schedules. "Excuse me," announces what appears to be the troop's transportation coordinator, a particularly officious female you mentally nickname Metro Manager, but you're sitting too far from the edge. "We need you moved approximately 3 feet closer to the water for optimal boarding efficiency." You're too stunned by the presumption to respond immediately, which Metro Manager apparently interprets as compliance. She begins directing the repositioning of your morning routine with the authority of someone who's clearly given this considerable thought. "Perfect. Now, we'll need you to remain stationary between sunrise and mid-morning for the eastbound commute, then again in the late afternoon for the return journey. Try to keep your back level. Some of the younger monkeys are complaining about the irregular surface." What follows is perhaps the most surreal period of your adult life, during which you discover that you've inadvertently become a public transportation service, complete with schedule disputes, passenger complaints, and service reliability issues that are apparently somehow your fault. The monkeys develop increasingly elaborate expectations for your performance as their transportation provider. They want you positioned at specific angles for optimal boarding. They expect you to remain motionless during their crossings, regardless of your own activities or comfort. They've even begun rating your performance, with younger monkeys providing feedback on the quality of your back as a travel surface. "Too bumpy," complains one adolescent after what you thought was a perfectly smooth crossing. "And you moved slightly during the transfer." The good capybara would never move during passenger boarding. The situation reaches a crisis point when the troop begins treating you not just as transportation, but as a mobile meeting space. They start conducting their daily social business while positioned on your back, apparently under the impression that you exist primarily to facilitate their community activities. You wake up one morning to discover an entire family conference taking place between your shoulder blades, complete with animated discussions about territorial disputes, relationship drama, and what sounds like a detailed analysis of the local fruit quality. The meeting shows no signs of concluding, and new monkeys continue to arrive to participate in what has apparently become a regular social event. This is when you realize that the situation has moved beyond simple transportation services into something approaching complete colonization of your personal space. Your solution comes from an unexpected source: enlightened self-interest combined with practical negotiation skills. Rather than attempting to reject the monkeys' transportation demands outright, which would likely result in them becoming even more demanding and possibly vindictive, you decide to formalize the arrangement in a way that provides benefits to both parties. You begin by establishing clear service hours. Morning commute runs from sunrise to mid-morning, afternoon service from late afternoon to sunset. Outside these hours, your back is off limits for transportation purposes. You communicate this policy through the simple expedient of submerging yourself whenever monkeys attempt unauthorized boarding during non-service hours. The monkeys initially object to this restriction, but they quickly adapt when they realize that the alternative might be no transportation service at all. The breakthrough comes when you discover that several of the monkeys are quite skilled at grooming, and that they're willing to provide this service in exchange for reliable transportation. What evolves is a symbiotic relationship that benefits everyone. They get their highway system, you get professional maintenance services that you'd never be able to provide for yourself. The grooming turns out to be remarkably thorough and surprisingly pleasant. The monkeys have excellent technique for removing parasites, untangling fur, and reaching spots that you can't access on your own. In exchange, you provide not just transportation, but a stable platform for their various social activities. Within a month, you've transformed from an unwilling public transportation service into the beating heart of a small but efficiently functioning interspecies community. The monkeys handle scheduling and quality control for their own services, while you provide the infrastructure that makes their daily routines possible. Metro Manager, who has evolved from officious transportation coordinator into something approaching a personal assistant, takes it upon herself to ensure that your grooming services are up to professional standards. The small monkeys missed a spot behind your left ear yesterday. She informs you during one of your regular service reviews. I've scheduled additional attention for that area during this afternoon's maintenance session. Commentary, who has been observing this entire development with fascination, offers his analysis. I have to admit, I didn't see this coming. Most capybaras would have simply submerged themselves until the monkeys found someone else to bother. Instead, you've created what appears to be the wetland's first successful public-private partnership. Impressive adaptability. Your reputation as a capybara of unusual competence and unflappable demeanor apparently reaches beyond the local community because you find yourself facing what amounts to your first diplomatic crisis, when a young jaguar decides to test whether your calm extends to life-threatening situations. The jaguar, clearly inexperienced, possibly on his first solo hunting expedition, approaches your island with the kind of focused intensity that suggests he's been planning this encounter for some time. He's magnificent in the way that apex predators are magnificent. All muscle and controlled power, with the kind of casual grace that makes it clear he could kill you without breaking stride. He's also clearly nervous. This becomes apparent when he spends nearly 10 minutes stalking you from the far shore, apparently working up the courage to commit to what should be a straightforward hunting situation. His approach involves a lot of crouching, repositioning, and what looks suspiciously like pacing, all of which gives you ample time to observe his technique and reach some interesting conclusions about his level of experience. When he finally makes his move, sliding into the water with commendable stealth, you're ready for him. Your strategy, developed during those crucial minutes of observation, is based on the revolutionary concept of making yourself as uninteresting a hunting target as possible. Rather than panicking, fleeing, or attempting to fight, you simply continue your normal routine while keeping track of his approach through peripheral awareness. The jaguar reaches your island and emerges from the water with the fluid grace that makes big cats such impressive predators. He's clearly expecting you to run, which would trigger his chase instincts and make the whole encounter much more exciting for him. Instead, you glance up briefly, acknowledge his presence with the kind of polite nod you might give any neighbor, and return to your afternoon grass-eating routine. This is not the reaction he was expecting. He freezes, apparently recalculating the entire situation. You continue eating with the kind of focused attention that suggests you find the grass considerably more interesting than the large predator who's currently trying to figure out how to hunt something that refuses to act like prey. What follows is perhaps the most educational hunting encounter in the history of predator-prey relationships. The jaguar attempts to trigger your flight response by moving closer, positioning himself between you and the water in what should be a threatening display of hunting competence. You respond by shifting slightly to face him more directly, which has the unintended effect of making it clear that you're significantly larger than he initially estimated. This is when you see the first flicker of doubt cross his expression. Jaguars are powerful hunters, but they're also practical ones. They prefer prey that's small enough to kill quickly and efficiently, and you've apparently crossed the threshold from manageable target to potentially more trouble than it's worth. You decide to help him reach the correct conclusion, rather than continuing to ignore him, which might eventually provoke him into action just to save face. You engage in what can only be described as a very slow educational seminar on why capybaras make terrible prey. You demonstrate your swimming competence by sliding casually into the water and executing a few laps around the island, showcasing your speed and maneuverability in your natural element. You're not fast enough to outrun a jaguar on land, but in water, you're considerably more mobile than he is. You showcase your size by positioning yourself on the shore in a way that emphasizes your substantial bulk. You're not enormous, but you're large enough that killing you would require significant effort and carry real risk of injury for him. Most importantly, you demonstrate your complete lack of fear through your continued calm behavior. Prey animals that don't act afraid are usually not afraid for good reasons. They're either too tough to kill easily, too well defended to be worth attacking, or too smart to be caught unprepared. The turning point comes when you actually address him directly. "Afternoon," you say, your voice carrying the kind of casual friendliness you might use to greet any neighbor. "Nice day for a swim." The effect on the jaguar is immediate and profound. Prey isn't supposed to initiate conversation. Prey is supposed to run, hide, or at minimum show some signs of distress. Prey definitely isn't supposed to comment on the weather. The jaguar sits down, apparently needing a moment to process this development. You can practically see him working through the implications. If his target is calm enough to make small talk, either it's not actually suitable prey, or he's dealing with something significantly more complex than a standard hunting situation. First time in this area? You continue, settling into your most approachable demeanor. The fishing's quite good near the fallen log on the north side, if you're interested in alternatives. This is when the jaguar apparently decides that discretion is the better part of valor. He's clearly a smart predator, smart enough to recognize when a hunting situation has evolved into something else entirely. Rather than escalating a confrontation that's no longer following standard predator-prey protocols, he chooses to treat your suggestion as a face-saving exit strategy. "Thanks for the tip," he says, his voice carrying a note of what might be respect, or possibly just confusion. "I'll check that out." He rises with the same fluid grace he brought to his initial approach, but his demeanor has shifted from hunting mode to something approaching neighborly interaction. As he prepares to leave, he pauses and looks back at you with an expression that suggests he's learned something important about the complexity of wetland social dynamics. "You're not what I expected," he admits. "Most capybaras aren't," you reply. "We tend to be more complicated than we look." He nods thoughtfully, apparently filing this information away for future reference, and disappears into the forest with the kind of quiet efficiency that reminds you why jaguars are such successful predators. As you watch him go, you realize you've just conducted your first successful diplomatic negotiation with an apex predator, transforming a potentially lethal encounter into what amounts to a neighborly exchange of local information. Commentary, who apparently witnessed the entire interaction from a safe distance, flies over to offer his analysis. "I've seen a lot of things in my time, but I've never seen anyone diffuse a hunting situation by offering restaurant recommendations. That jaguar is going to have stories to tell for years." Your growing reputation as a reasonable capybara who can handle complex situations with calm competence reaches its ultimate test when the wetlands face their most severe drought in decades. Water levels drop to critical lows, transforming your spacious lagoon system into a series of increasingly isolated pools and creating the kind of resource scarcity that usually leads to territorial conflicts and ecological breakdown. Instead, you find yourself participating in what can only be described as the wetland equivalent of a United Nations peace conference, as representatives from various species gather around the last reliable watering hole to work out a survival strategy that doesn't involve everyone killing each other. The summit convenes at what was once a minor backwater, but has now become the most valuable real estate in the region, a deep spring-fed pool that shows no signs of drying up completely. The attendees represent the full spectrum of wetland society. Caimans who could easily enforce their will through strength, birds who have the mobility to find alternatives, mammals of various sizes who are all facing the same basic problem of staying hydrated, and you apparently invited because everyone has decided you're the kind of individual who can be trusted to participate in complex negotiations without making everything worse. Your role in these proceedings, as it turns out, is mostly to sit quietly and look reasonable while everyone else argues. This sounds simple, but it proves to be surprisingly demanding work. Looking reasonable during heated negotiations requires a specific kind of active listening that acknowledges every participant's concerns, while maintaining visible neutrality about potential solutions. You become a sort of living embodiment of the conference's commitment to finding workable compromises, rather than simply allowing the strongest voices to dominate. The negotiations begin with what might charitably be called an exchange of positions, though it sounds more like a series of increasingly creative threats and counter-threats delivered in the diplomatic language of interspecies relations. The Caimans, led by your old acquaintance Big Jim, open with a position that amounts to, "We could take this water by force, but we're willing to discuss reasonable sharing arrangements provided everyone acknowledges our fundamental superiority in this situation." The birds, represented by a coalition of species ranging from herons to toucans, counter with, "We can find water elsewhere if necessary, but we'd prefer to maintain our traditional use patterns, and we'd like everyone to remember that we provide valuable services that shouldn't be taken for granted." The various mammals present a united front that boils down to, "We need access to survive. We're willing to negotiate schedules and protocols, but any solution that doesn't guarantee our basic needs is unacceptable." You sit in the middle of this diplomatic maelstrom, occasionally nodding to acknowledge particularly well-made points, but mostly just being present as a visible reminder that reasonable solutions are possible, and that not every participant in this conference is primarily motivated by territorial ambition or survival desperation. Your first active contribution comes when the negotiations threaten to break down over scheduling conflicts. The caimans prefer to use the water during the hottest parts of the day, when their cold-blooded metabolisms require temperature regulation. The birds want early morning and evening access for drinking and bathing. The mammals need reliable access throughout the day for their various hydration needs. The positions seem incompatible until you suggest what becomes known as the zoning solution. Different sections of the pool allocated for different uses during different times, with a central area maintained as shared space for emergencies. It's not a revolutionary concept, but it's the kind of practical compromise that allows everyone to save face while getting most of what they actually need. More importantly, it establishes the principle that the pool can be managed as a shared resource rather than fought over as contested territory. Your second major contribution involves what the diplomatic historians will probably remember as the grooming incident. Tensions between the monkeys and the birds threaten to undermine the entire conference when a dispute over fruit trees evolves into increasingly personal attacks on each species' hygiene standards and general worthiness to participate in serious negotiations. Rather than attempting to mediate the dispute directly, you simply request grooming services from the monkeys while positioning yourself near enough to the bird delegation that they can observe the process. The demonstration of interspecies cooperation serves as a practical reminder that different species can work together beneficially without compromising their individual dignity or interests. The breakthrough that saves the conference comes when you propose what becomes known as the Succession Protocol, a framework for managing the water resource that anticipates future changes in availability and establishes procedures for adjusting the sharing arrangements as conditions evolve. The genius of this approach is that it transforms the current crisis from a one-time resource allocation problem into an ongoing management challenge that everyone has an interest in solving cooperatively. Rather than negotiating a temporary truce that will break down when conditions change, the participants create a system that can adapt to new circumstances while maintaining the basic principle of shared access. The final agreement, hammered out over 3 days of intensive negotiations, establishes rotating usage schedules, emergency protocols for resource sharing during crisis periods, and a dispute resolution mechanism that relies on consultation with neutral parties, a role that you apparently now occupy permanently. As the various delegations prepare to return to their territories, Big Jim approaches to offer what amounts to official recognition of your new status in the wetland diplomatic community. "You did good work here," he says, his tone carrying the weight of someone whose approval is not lightly given. "When the next crisis comes, and there will be a next crisis, we'll know who to call." Commentary, who has been documenting the entire proceedings with the dedication of a war correspondent, offers his final analysis. "I've covered a lot of animal politics over the years, but I've never seen anyone establish themselves as a permanent neutral party through the simple expedient of being more reasonable than everyone else. You've essentially created a new governmental position, the capybara of reasonable solutions. As you settle into your evening routine, floating peacefully in the preserved waters of your lagoon, while listening to the gentle sounds of a wetland community that has successfully navigated its first major diplomatic crisis, you realize that you've achieved something remarkable. You've become not just a successful individual capybara, but an essential component of the larger ecosystem's ability to function harmoniously. You're no longer just surviving in the wetlands, you're helping the wetlands survive. And somehow, through the simple application of patience, reasonableness, and the willingness to be present during difficult conversations, you've transformed from a bumbling adolescent into the kind of adult that others look to for guidance when the world becomes complicated. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate the kind of leadership that comes from mastering the art of existing peacefully in a complex world. Tonight, you float in the warm water under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're meant to be doing in the world. Peak capybara achieved. Romance, when it finally arrives in your life, comes with all the dramatic intensity of a particularly comfortable afternoon nap. There's no lightning bolt of recognition, no sweep you off your feet moment of passion, just the gradual realization that sharing the same general area of water with this particular female feels more right than sharing it with anyone else you've encountered. She's practical in the way that suggests she's given considerable thought to what makes a suitable partner, and apparently your combination of prime, real estate, diplomatic immunity with the local predators, and proven ability to remain motionless for impressive periods without showing signs of mental distress meets her criteria for long-term compatibility. You're not entirely sure when the courtship officially begins, mostly because it looks exactly like two capybaras who happen to enjoy the same feeding areas and have similar opinions about optimal water temperature. But there's a quality of intentionality to your shared activities that suggests something more significant than coincidental proximity. Your romantic strategy, such as it is, involves demonstrating your fitness as a potential mate through displays of supreme capybara competence. This turns out to be exactly the right approach for someone whose standards apparently center around practical considerations, rather than flashy demonstrations of physical prowess. You showcase your ability to remain perfectly motionless for extended periods, a skill that proves surprisingly impressive when presented as a deliberate performance rather than simple laziness. You demonstrate your mastery of temperature regulation by positioning yourself in exactly the right spot to take advantage of shifting sun patterns throughout the day, creating what amounts to a masterclass in environmental comfort management. Your grass-finding abilities receive particular attention during what you privately think of as your foraging exhibitions. You lead her on scenic tours of your territory, pointing out the premium grazing areas that lesser capybaras haven't discovered, the seasonal patches that provide optimal nutrition at different times of year, and the emergency food sources that remain available even during resource scarcity. This section here, you explain during one of these tours, gesturing toward a patch of water lettuce that looks unremarkable but tastes significantly better than the more obvious alternatives. Stays tender longer than the stuff everyone else goes for. Better mineral content too. She examines your recommendation with the thoroughness of someone conducting a professional evaluation, and her approving nod suggests that your local knowledge meets her standards for territorial management competence. Most importantly, you demonstrate your talent for looking completely unbothered by anything predators, weather changes, territorial disputes, or social drama. This proves to be perhaps your most attractive quality, suggesting as it does that life with you would involve minimal stress and maximum peaceful coexistence with the complexities of wetland existence. Your courtship conversations, when they occur, focus on practical matters. The best times for swimming to avoid the heaviest predator activity, optimal strategies for weather management during the upcoming season, and comparative assessments of various feeding areas throughout the territory. It's not romantic in any traditional sense, but it establishes the kind of fundamental compatibility that suggests you could share space long-term without driving each other to distraction. The turning point comes when she begins incorporating your schedule into her own daily routine, positioning herself to take advantage of the grooming services provided by your monkey transportation partners, and joining your evening floats in the quiet backwaters where you conduct your daily contemplative sessions. Your monkeys do excellent work, she observes after her first professional grooming session, delivered with the tone of someone offering a significant compliment about your household management skills. They're very thorough, you agree, pleased that she recognizes the quality of the services you've negotiated, and they're reliable about the schedule. Within a few weeks, you're operating as what amounts to a domestic partnership, sharing resources, coordinating activities, and presenting yourselves to the broader wetland community as an established couple. It's the kind of gradual transition into commitment that feels entirely natural right up until the moment you realize it's happened. Commentary. Observing this development with his usual editorial perspective, offers his analysis. I have to admit, I've never seen anyone conduct a romance that looks so much like a successful business merger. But if the goal is long-term compatibility, you've probably found the right approach. Pregnancy transforms your practical partner into someone you don't entirely recognize, still fundamentally reasonable, but with a significantly reduced tolerance for anything that might be interpreted as territorial encroachment or resource competition. She develops opinions about optimal sunbathing locations that are both specific and non-negotiable, and she expresses these opinions with the kind of quiet authority that makes discussion seem inadvisable. "This spot is mine now," she announces one morning, referring to what had previously been considered shared territory on the prime southeastern shore of your island. "You can use the western side." The western side receives approximately half as much morning sun and has inferior grass access. But you recognize that this is not a negotiation so much as an informational briefing about new domestic arrangements. You relocate without comment, having developed enough relationship wisdom to understand that pregnancy involves temporary shifts in resource allocation that are best accepted with grace. Her territorial instincts, previously limited to reasonable preferences about feeding areas and sleeping spots, expand to cover approximately 3 times your previous joint territory. She begins patrolling the expanded boundaries with the kind of systematic thoroughness that makes it clear she's preparing for something that will require significant space and absolute security. The tourists who occasionally visit your lagoon for photography sessions find themselves subjected to what can only be described as aggressive indifference. She doesn't threaten them directly, but she positions herself in ways that make it clear their presence is being closely monitored, and that any behavior she interprets as intrusive will be met with immediate and decisive action. She's making the humans nervous. Commentary observes during one of these encounters, "I've never seen anyone project territorial authority quite so effectively while appearing to do nothing at all. Your role during this period becomes a complex balance of being supportive while maintaining enough distance to avoid becoming a target for her expanded territorial sensitivities. You learn to anticipate her space requirements and position yourself within range to provide assistance if needed, but not so close that your presence feels like an intrusion on her preparation activities. This involves developing what you privately call strategic hovering, remaining available without being intrusive, demonstrating concern without suggesting that you think she can't handle the situation herself. It's perhaps the most diplomatically challenging period of your adult life, requiring constant attention to signals and boundaries that shift without warning. The physical changes are gradual but unmistakable. She becomes progressively more substantial, developing the kind of impressive bulk that makes her territorial claims seem even more reasonable. Her swimming style shifts from the efficient gliding you originally found attractive to a more stately progress that accommodates her changing center of gravity. Her appetite increases dramatically, leading to what amounts to a full-time foraging operation that keeps you busy, identifying new food sources and ensuring that her expanded nutritional needs don't conflict with the feeding schedules of your monkey partners or the feeding lining. Territorial arrangements you've negotiated with neighboring capybaras. "I need more of that sweet grass from the northern section," she announces one afternoon, referring to a particularly choice patch that requires a considerable journey to access. "And some of those root vegetables you found last week." You spend increasing amounts of your time on procurement missions, traveling throughout your territory and beyond to locate the specific foods that meet her evolving dietary requirements. It's exhausting work, but it provides you with a useful role during a period when most of your other normal activities have been suspended, pending further developments. As her due date approaches, she becomes increasingly focused on nest preparation, spending long periods arranging and rearranging the vegetation in selected spots around your island, with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that makes it clear this is serious business, requiring professional-level competence. You watch these preparations with the kind of respectful attention you might give to any expert working in their specialized field, occasionally offering to fetch additional materials, but mostly just trying to stay out of the way while remaining available for consultation or assistance. The babies arrive during a quiet morning in late spring, flopping into the world with the kind of dramatic timing that suggests they've been planning their entrance for weeks. There are 3 of them, 2 females and a male, and they emerge looking like tiny, waterlogged versions of yourself, complete with the bewildered expression that you remember from your own early days. Unlike your own mother, who treated your arrival as an interesting development that didn't require significant changes to her daily routine, your mate approaches motherhood with the same systematic thoroughness she brings to everything else. She positions the babies in optimal locations for warmth and protection, establishes feeding schedules that maximize their nutritional intake, and creates what amounts to a comprehensive security perimeter around their immediate vicinity. Your role in these early days is primarily that of supportive presence and backup security. You're expected to remain within range for emergencies while avoiding any behavior that might be interpreted as interference with her maternal management systems. It's a delicate balance that requires you to be simultaneously attentive and invisible. The babies themselves are alarmingly helpless, possessing none of the basic competencies that you remember developing during your own early weeks. They can't swim with anything approaching adequacy. They have no apparent ability to identify edible vegetation, and they produce an impressive variety of squeaking sounds that seem designed to attract every predator within a considerable radius. They're supposed to be this useless. Your mate informs you when she notices your concerned observation of their various inadequacies. They'll figure it out, capybaras always do. This turns out to be surprisingly accurate. Over the following weeks, you watch as the babies gradually develop the basic skills they'll need to function as independent capybaras, though their learning process involves considerably more trial and error than you remember experiencing yourself. Your first major parenting crisis comes when the smallest female you mentally nickname her, Squeaker, for obvious reasons, decides to test her swimming abilities in water that's significantly deeper than her current skill level. Warrants. You discover her approximately 10 feet from shore, paddling frantically while producing distress calls that suggest she's not entirely confident in her ability to complete the return journey. Your rescue technique involves what you later realize is the foundation of your entire parenting philosophy: calm competence combined with minimal drama. You swim out to where Squeaker is struggling, position yourself beside her, and simply exist as a stable presence that she can use to rest and reorient herself. "You're fine," you tell her, using the same tone you might use to discuss the weather. "The shore is right there. Take your time." She paddles back to safety, using you as both navigation aid and emergency flotation device. And you escort her to shore without making a big production of what could have been a genuinely dangerous situation. Your mate observes this intervention with approval, apparently recognizing that you've handled your first major parenting challenge with appropriate capybara style. Your approach to child rearing, as it develops over the following months, is distinctly capybara in its emphasis on calm presence, practical instruction, and the assumption that children will learn most of what they need to know by watching competent adults do capybara things correctly. You don't lecture the babies about proper behavior or create elaborate rules about what they can and cannot do. Instead, you simply conduct your normal activities with slightly more deliberate attention to technique, creating what amounts to ongoing educational demonstrations of how to exist successfully as a capybara. When they wander too far from safe areas, you employ what becomes your signature parenting technique: the meaningful pause. You stop whatever you're doing and look in their direction with the kind of patient attention that makes it clear you're waiting for them to reconsider their current course of action. It's remarkably effective, possibly because it requires them to evaluate their own behavior rather than simply responding to external commands. "That water looks pretty deep," you might observe when one of them approaches an area that's beyond their current swimming competence. Your tone, carrying no judgment but a clear suggestion that this might be worth thinking about more carefully. The meaningful pause works because it respects their developing judgment while providing gentle guidance about potentially problematic situations. Rather than creating a system of rules they need to remember and follow, you help them develop the kind of situational awareness that will serve them well throughout their lives. Your swimming instruction follows the same philosophical approach. Rather than formal lessons that might create anxiety about their performance, you simply include them in your regular swimming activities, adjusting your route and pace to accommodate their current abilities, while gradually expanding their confidence and competence. "Let's check out the shallow area by the northern reeds," you suggest when you want to provide swimming practice that's challenging but not overwhelming. "Good grass over there, and the current's gentle." These family swimming expeditions become opportunities for practical education about navigation, water safety, and environmental awareness, all delivered through the simple expedient of including them in normal adult activities while maintaining appropriate supervision. Your grass selection seminars represent perhaps your most ambitious educational programming, involving what amounts to interpretive chewing designed to demonstrate the difference between various types of vegetation and their respective nutritional and digestive properties. "This stuff here," you explain, indicating a patch of water hyacinth that looks appetizing but has a tendency to cause stomach problems. "Tastes fine going down but doesn't agree with everyone. Try a small amount first and see how you feel about it." You demonstrate proper sampling technique, showing them how to test unfamiliar foods in quantities small enough to avoid serious digestive distress, while large enough to provide accurate information about palatability and nutritional value. The babies watch these demonstrations with varying levels of attention, occasionally sampling your recommendations, but more often making their own food choices based on what appears to be a combination of curiosity and random selection. This leads to several educational experiences involving plants that taste better than they digest, providing natural consequences that reinforce your more theoretical instruction. Your lessons in predator awareness follow a similar practical approach. Rather than attempting to explain the complex social dynamics that govern wetland safety, you simply include the babies in your normal activities while maintaining appropriate vigilance and providing running commentary about environmental conditions. Cayman weather today. You might observe on mornings when the atmospheric conditions make reptilian activity more likely. Good day for staying in the shallow areas and keeping an eye on the water. The babies gradually absorb this kind of environmental awareness through repeated exposure to your decision-making process, learning to read the same environmental cues you use to manage safety and resource access throughout your territory. By the time they're approaching independence, they've developed the basic competencies they'll need to function as adult capybaras: adequate swimming skills, reasonable food selection judgment, appropriate wariness about potential dangers, and most importantly, the kind of calm competence that will allow them to navigate social situations without creating unnecessary drama or conflict. As the babies grow more independent and require less direct supervision, you find yourself with time to contemplate the changes that parenthood has brought to your understanding of capybara existence. The most significant realization is that the older capybaras you admired for their serene wisdom weren't necessarily wiser than you thought they were, just tired from years of managing the kind of low-level but constant responsibility that comes with ensuring that smaller, less competent capybaras don't accidentally kill themselves through poor judgment. You begin to understand why the Buddha and the senator always look slightly weary around the edges, and why they seem to view the activities of younger capybaras with the kind of patient tolerance usually reserved for natural disasters or seasonal weather patterns. It's not that they'd lost their enthusiasm for life, it's that they'd gained a deep appreciation for the amount of energy required to maintain the kind of calm competence that makes complex social systems function smoothly. Your own energy levels, you notice, have shifted in ways that suggest you're beginning the gradual transition from active adult to responsible elder. You still enjoy your daily routines, but you approach them with the kind of measured pace that conserves energy for the unexpected demands of family management and community leadership. The babies themselves provide ongoing education in the reality that competence is not automatically transferred from parent to offspring. Each of them approaches the basic challenges of capybara existence with their own particular combination of natural talent and creative inadequacy, requiring you to adjust your teaching methods to accommodate different learning styles and attention spans. Squeaker proves to be naturally cautious, but tends to overthink simple situations until they become unnecessarily complicated. The larger female, nicknamed Steady for her methodical approach to everything, grasps concepts quickly, but needs considerable practice to develop reliable execution. The male, who earns the name Splash through his enthusiastic but imprecise swimming technique, shows excellent instincts but limited patience for detailed instruction. Managing these three distinct personalities, while maintaining your other adult responsibilities, provides you with a crash course in the kind of diplomatic skills that will serve you well as you continue your evolution toward elder status. You learn to provide guidance that's specific enough to be useful, but general enough to allow them to develop their own approaches to problem solving. By the end of their first year, the babies have achieved basic independence and are beginning to establish their own territories within the broader wetland community. Watching them navigate their first adult challenges with varying degrees of success provides you with the kind of perspective on the continuity of capybara existence that makes you understand why experienced adults often seem to be viewing current events through the lens of patterns they've seen repeated many times before. You're still the same capybara who mastered the art of diplomatic neutrality and created successful partnerships with monkey transportation services, but you've added layers of understanding about the complexity of maintaining social systems across generations. The wisdom phase hasn't made you smarter. Exactly. It's made you more aware of how much sustained effort is required to keep everything working smoothly. As you settle into your evening routine, floating peacefully in the familiar waters of your lagoon, while listening to the gentle sounds of your offspring conducting their own adult business in nearby territories, you realize that you've achieved something remarkable. You've successfully transferred your hard-won competence to the next generation, without losing your own sense of purpose or satisfaction in the ongoing project of existing peacefully in a complex world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, to demonstrate the kind of patient wisdom that comes from understanding both how things work and how much energy is required to maintain them. Tonight, you float in the warm water under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done your part to ensure the continuation of capybara excellence in your corner of the wetlands. You wake up each morning with the kind of perfect timing that comes from years of fine-tuning your relationship with the sun. No alarm clocks, no schedule anxiety, just the gentle recognition that the light hitting your preferred sleeping spot has reached exactly the right angle to make continued rest less appealing than the prospect of beginning another day of masterfully orchestrated routine. Your spot, carefully selected through years of experimentation and seasonal adjustment, catches the morning warmth without subjecting you to the harsh brightness that makes early rising feel like punishment. It's positioned to take advantage of the prevailing breezes, protected from the most aggressive morning insects, and located within easy access of both water and your preferred breakfast location. This is middle age at its finest, not the frantic energy of youth or the careful conservation of true elderhood, but the sweet spot where competence meets contentment, and where every element of your daily existence has been optimized through experience, patience, and the accumulated wisdom that comes from paying attention to what actually works. Your morning routine has evolved into something approaching performance art, though you'd never call it that yourself. Every movement serves multiple purposes, every pause contains intention, and the whole sequence unfolds with the kind of casual precision that makes complex things look effortless. You begin with what appears to be simple stretching but is actually a comprehensive assessment of your physical condition, weather prospects, and the general state of your territory. The way your joints feel when you extend your legs provides information about humidity levels and approaching weather changes. The stiffness in your back tells you whether you spent too much time yesterday in positions that prioritize comfort over long-term maintenance. Your first swim of the day serves the practical purpose of washing off the accumulation of small birds who've spent the night roosting on your back, but it also functions as both exercise and reconnaissance. As you move through the familiar waters around your island, you're gathering information about water temperature, current patterns, and any overnight changes to the local environment. Morning constitutional. Commentary observes from his regular perch, apparently having appointed himself as the official chronicler of your daily activities. I've been timing you for the past month, and you hit the water within 2 minutes of the same time every day. That's either impressive consistency or disturbing compulsiveness. The birds who've used you as their overnight accommodation facility rise from your back with the kind of casual efficiency that suggests this arrangement has been formalized through years of mutual accommodation. They've learned to time their departure with your morning swim, and you've learned to surface gently enough that their takeoff doesn't involve emergency maneuvers. Your breakfast routine takes place at what has become known throughout the local community as the Good Grass Patch, a prime feeding area that you've enhanced over the years through careful cultivation and strategic water management. What started as a simple preference for a particular section of shore has evolved into something approaching agricultural engineering, with diverted water flow that keeps the vegetation optimally irrigated and controlled, grazing that maintains the grass at perfect nutritional density. The Good Grass Patch now operates on established visiting hours for smaller herbivores who benefit from your agricultural improvements. You've worked out informal agreements with various rabbit families, a community of water voles, and several species of waterfowl who share your refined taste in vegetation. Tuesday Turtle Day. You announce to a family of small turtles who've arrived for their weekly feeding appointment. Your voice carries the tone of someone managing a successful restaurant who's pleased to see regular customers. The eastern section's especially tender this week. This arrangement benefits everyone involved. The smaller animals get access to premium grazing without having to compete with larger herbivores, and you get the satisfaction of maintaining a feeding area that's used to capacity without being overgrazed. It's ecosystem management at its most practical, achieved through the simple application of Capybara principles: patience, observation, and the assumption that reasonable creatures can work out mutually beneficial arrangements. Somewhere during your middle years, without anyone making a formal announcement about it, you've become the wetland's unofficial mediator. When tensions arise between species territorial disputes, resource conflicts, disagreements about social protocols, the various parties involved have developed the habit of gathering in your general vicinity until the presence of someone manifestly reasonable helps everyone remember how to behave like civilized creatures. You're not entirely sure how this happened, but you suspect it's related to your proven ability to remain calm during complex situations while somehow radiating the kind of stable presence that makes everyone else feel slightly more capable of handling their problems rationally. Your mediation technique, such as it is, involves mostly just being present while other animals work through their issues. You don't offer advice unless directly asked, you don't take sides in disputes, and you don't try to impose solutions on situations that the participants are perfectly capable of resolving themselves once they remember to think before they react. This morning's mediation case involves a disagreement between a family of coatis and a troop of squirrel monkeys about fruit tree access rights in the forest section adjacent to your territory. Both groups have legitimate claims to the resource, both have reasonable arguments about traditional use patterns, and both have worked themselves into the kind of emotional state that makes compromise seem like defeat. The big capybara will understand, announces the lead coati, apparently having decided that you represent neutral authority in this situation. We've been using those trees since before these monkeys even arrived in this territory. The trees don't belong to anyone, counters the monkey spokesperson, directing her argument toward you as well. First come, first served has always been the rule, and we've been getting there earlier every day for weeks. You settle into your most approachable listening position, which mainly involves looking like you have all day to hear both sides of the argument and no particular investment in any specific outcome. This seems to have a calming effect on both parties, who apparently find it easier to present their cases rationally when they're addressing someone who clearly isn't going to get excited about their conflict. The dispute resolves itself, as these disputes usually do, once both sides have had the opportunity to present their positions to a neutral audience and realize that their fundamental interests aren't actually incompatible. The coatis prefer the morning fruit that's best harvested early, while the monkeys are more interested in the afternoon varieties that ripen later in the day. A simple scheduling agreement that plays to each group's natural preferences satisfies everyone involved. Thanks for listening, the coati says as the two groups prepare to implement their negotiated solution. Sometimes you just need someone calm around to help you think straight. This happens several times a week now. These informal consultation sessions, where your primary contribution is existing peacefully while others work through their problems. It's community service that requires no special training, no dramatic intervention skills, just the willingness to be present and patient while your neighbors figure out how to coexist successfully. Commentary, who has observed several of these mediation sessions, offers his analysis. I think what you provide is proof that reasonable solutions are possible. When animals see someone who's obviously competent but not agitated about the problem, it reminds them that most conflicts aren't actually that complicated once you strip away the emotional drama. The arrival of humans with cameras marks the beginning of what you've come to think of as performance season, a period when your natural capybara activities become the subject of intense photographic documentation by visitors who seem to find your existence remarkably photogenic. You've learned to pose without making it obvious that you're posing, a skill that involves looking exactly as you always look but doing it more intentionally. The humans seem particularly drawn to what they call your Zen-like presence, apparently interpreting your natural state of relaxed alertness as some form of advanced spiritual achievement. Look at that serenity, you overhear one photographer saying to another as they position themselves for optimal shot angles. It's like he's achieved perfect mindfulness. What you've actually achieved is perfect understanding of your own daily routine and environmental needs. But you recognize that the humans find it easier to interpret this as mystical wisdom rather than practical competence. You're happy to provide them with the photogenic moments they're seeking, partly out of generosity toward fellow creatures who seem to find your presence somehow therapeutic, and partly because their presence tends to keep the more aggressive predators at a respectful distance. Your tourist season persona involves a carefully calibrated increase in the deliberateness of your normal activities. Your morning swims become slightly more graceful, your grass eating takes on a more meditative quality, and your sunbathing positions are selected with greater attention to their visual appeal. It's not performance, exactly more like being the best possible version of your normal self. The humans particularly enjoy what they call your interactions with nature, apparently fascinated by the way various smaller animals use you as furniture, transportation, and general life support. They produce excited commentary about your harmonious relationship with the ecosystem, which is accurate enough, though they seem to miss the fact that this harmony is based primarily on practical arrangements rather than spiritual enlightenment. "Oh my God, look at the birds just sitting on him," one visitor announces with the kind of wonder usually reserved for natural miracles. "He's like a living meditation garden." The birds in question, a mixed collection of species who've learned that your back provides excellent perching opportunities, seem slightly bemused by the human attention but continue their normal activities of grooming, preening, and offering unsolicited commentary on your daily routines. Your favorite tourist interaction involves a regular visitor who's been photographing you for several seasons and has apparently developed a personal relationship with what she calls your spiritual journey. She arrives with increasing elaborate camera equipment and spends considerable time capturing what she describes as your moments of profound contemplation. "I've been following your story for 3 years now," she explains during one of her visits, apparently addressing you as someone capable of understanding and appreciating her documentation project. "The way you've grown into your role as a community elder is really inspiring. You appreciate her attention to your personal development, though you suspect her interpretation of your spiritual evolution might be more dramatic than your actual experience of gradually becoming more competent at existing peacefully in the world. Still, if your presence provides her with whatever she's seeking in terms of natural wisdom, you're happy to continue offering photo opportunities that meet her artistic and spiritual requirements." One of the unexpected benefits of middle age is the development of what you privately call meteorological intuition, the ability to predict weather changes through a combination of joint sensitivity, behavioral observation, and accumulated experience with local climate patterns. Your joints have become remarkably accurate barometric pressure sensors, providing advance warning of approaching weather systems that allows you to make schedule adjustments and territorial preparations well before conditions actually change. A particular stiffness in your left shoulder means rain within 12 hours. Soreness in your hind legs indicates temperature drops that will require adjusted sunbathing schedules. More sophisticated weather prediction comes from reading the behavior of other species whose sensitivities to environmental changes provide different types of advance information. The herons become restless 18 hours before major storms. The monkeys adjust their feeding patterns 2 days ahead of extended dry periods. The fish change their activity levels in ways that reflect water temperature trends that won't become obvious to less sensitive observers for several days. This weather wisdom has made you a valuable community resource, though you're too polite to advertise your forecasting services or make a big production of your meteorological competence. Instead, you simply adjust your own activities in ways that provide subtle guidance to anyone paying attention to your behavioral patterns. Looks like a good day for staying close to shelter, you might observe during your morning community briefing, delivered in the casual tone of someone making conversation rather than issuing weather warnings. The herons have been acting unsettled since yesterday. The younger animals have learned to pay attention to these casual observations, apparently recognizing that your weather comments tend to be followed by conditions that make advanced preparation seem like an excellent idea. Your reputation for meteorological accuracy has developed gradually, based on a track record of subtle warnings that consistently prove accurate. Your weather management has become part of your daily routine, involving strategic positioning that takes advantage of predicted conditions, while maintaining flexibility for unexpected changes. You've identified optimal locations for various weather scenarios, alternative routes that remain accessible during different seasonal conditions, and backup resource areas that provide security during extended periods of challenging weather. You called that storm perfectly, commentary observes after a particularly accurate prediction that allowed the local community to prepare for 3 days of heavy rain. How do you do that? Just paying attention, you reply, which is accurate but doesn't really capture the complex integration of physical sensations, behavioral observations, and pattern recognition that allows you to read environmental conditions several days in advance. It's one of those middle-age competencies that develops so gradually you don't realize you've acquired it until you discover that everyone else considers it remarkable. Your fitness routine has evolved into something that looks like effortless grace, but represents years of careful attention to maintaining physical competence while minimizing unnecessary energy expenditure. You've developed what amounts to a comprehensive exercise program that's completely integrated into your normal daily activities, creating strength, flexibility, and endurance without requiring dedicated workout time. Your swimming technique, in particular, has reached a level of efficiency that makes it look like you're barely trying while actually maintaining excellent cardiovascular condition and muscle tone. Young capybaras occasionally attempt to copy your stroke, not realizing that what appears to be casual gliding through the water actually represents years of refinement and adjustment designed to maximize effectiveness while minimizing effort. How do you make that look so easy? A young male asks, after spending 20 minutes trying to reproduce your swimming style and achieving nothing but exhaustion and frustration. I'm working 3 times as hard and going half as fast. It's not about working harder, you explain, settling into your teaching voice. It's about working with the water instead of against it. Feel the current, use your natural buoyancy, let your body find its most efficient position. These impromptu swimming lessons have become a regular feature of your morning routine. As younger capybaras seek guidance on technique and efficiency, you've discovered that teaching others helps you refine your own understanding of movement and positioning, creating a feedback loop that continues to improve your performance, even as you enter what should theoretically be your declining athletic years. Your land-based fitness routine centers around what you call functional strength, maintaining the muscle tone and flexibility necessary for normal capybara activities without pursuing fitness for its own sake. Your stretching looks like casual preparation for daily activities but actually provides comprehensive maintenance for all your major muscle groups. Your climbing and positioning exercises appear to be simple territory management but function as strength training and balance work. The key to midlife fitness, you've discovered, is integration, making exercise so seamlessly part of your normal routine that it doesn't feel like additional work or time commitment. Your body maintenance happens automatically as part of eating, swimming, territory management, and social interaction, creating fitness that supports your lifestyle rather than competing with it for time and energy. You're in better shape than capybaras half your age. Your mate observes during one of your evening swims. Whatever you're doing, it's working. What you're doing, you realize, is treating your body as a precision instrument that requires regular maintenance and thoughtful operation, rather than as a machine that should be able to handle whatever demands you place on it without consideration for its ongoing needs. The most significant development of your middle years isn't physical or social. It's the gradual deepening of your understanding of what capybara existence actually involves and what makes it worthwhile. You've begun to understand that the secret to capybara life isn't about doing important things or achieving impressive goals. It's about being present for all the small, unremarkable moments that make up the texture of daily existence. This realization doesn't come as a dramatic revelation, but as a gradual recognition that emerges from years of paying attention to your own experience and the experiences of the creatures around you. The moments that provide the deepest satisfaction aren't the ones that would make good stories. They're the quiet instances of perfect alignment between yourself and your environment. The morning when the water temperature is exactly right for swimming, and the current carries you along your preferred route at precisely the pace that feels most natural. The afternoon, when the sun hits your favorite lounging spot at the perfect angle, and the breeze carries just the right combination of grassland and water scents. The evening when the sounds of the wetlands settling into night create exactly the acoustic environment that makes contemplation feel effortless. These moments can't be manufactured or scheduled. They arise from the intersection of preparation, attention, and favorable circumstances. But they can be recognized and appreciated when they occur, and the ability to notice and inhabit them fully turns out to be the foundation of what you're beginning to understand as wisdom. Your appreciation for unremarkable excellence extends to your observations of other creatures as well. You find yourself noticing and admiring the perfect execution of ordinary activities. The way a particular heron positions herself for optimal fishing efficiency, the technique a family of otters uses to navigate complex currents, the strategy a group of turtles employs to maximize their sun exposure while maintaining access to quick water entry. There's an art to doing normal things well. You mentioned to commentary during one of your philosophical discussions. Most creatures spend so much energy trying to be impressive that they never master the basics. This understanding transforms your approach to daily life from a series of tasks to be completed into a continuous opportunity for what might be called applied expertise. The ongoing practice of doing capybara things with increasing competence, attention, and appreciation for their inherent value. You begin to recognize that your role in the wetland community isn't based on any dramatic accomplishments or special talents, but on your consistent demonstration that ordinary life can be lived with extraordinary attention to quality and presence. Your influence comes not from what you do, but from how completely you inhabit what you are. As you settle into your evening routine, floating peacefully in the familiar waters that have become both home and workplace, you realize that middle age has brought you something you didn't expect. The recognition that mastery isn't about transcending your circumstances, but about inhabiting them so completely that your existence becomes a form of ongoing meditation on the possibilities contained within any life that's lived with sufficient presence and attention. Tomorrow will bring another day of small opportunities to practice the art of existing well, another chance to demonstrate that unremarkable activities performed with complete engagement can transform both the performer and the environment in which the performance takes place. Tonight, you float in the warm water under familiar stars, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding, finally, what it means to be exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you were meant to be doing, in exactly the way it should be done. Age arrives like a gradually stiffening joint. You don't notice it happening until one morning you wake up and realize that getting comfortable requires considerably more deliberate positioning than it used to, and that your tolerance for unnecessary drama has mysteriously evaporated overnight. You've crossed some invisible threshold into elderhood, though you're not entirely sure when it happened or who was responsible for issuing you the credentials. What you do know is that you've earned the right to be selectively social, to judge younger animals' life choices with the authority that comes from having made most of the same mistakes yourself, and to express your disapproval of contemporary standards through increasingly theatrical displays of how things should be done properly. You've become, you realize with some satisfaction, exactly what you always admired in the old capybaras when you were young. Mysteriously wise, selectively grumpy, and absolutely unimpressed by the kind of drama that used to seem important when you didn't know any better. The young male arrives in your territory on a Tuesday morning with the kind of earnest determination that immediately identifies him as someone who's heard about your reputation and decided that proximity to elder wisdom will somehow accelerate his own development into a capybara of significance. He's not wrong exactly, but his expectations about how this educational process will unfold suggest he's been romanticizing the whole mentor-student relationship considerably. He appears to be anticipating formal lessons, structured guidance, and perhaps some sort of capybara curriculum that will systematically transfer your accumulated knowledge into his eager but largely empty head. What he gets instead is several weeks of watching you conduct your normal routine, while you occasionally point out details that might escape the attention of someone who hasn't spent years learning to read the subtle complexities of wetland existence. The first thing you need to understand, you inform him during his initial orientation session, is that most of what looks like wisdom is actually just pattern recognition, combined with a willingness to pay attention to details that younger animals find boring. He nods enthusiastically, apparently under the impression that you've just revealed the first great secret of capybara mastery. You settle in to demonstrate what you privately call advanced, ignoring the sophisticated art of remaining completely aware of annoying situations while presenting no visible reaction that might encourage their continuation. Your first demonstration involves the monkey transportation service that continues to operate on your back, despite the fact that your joints now require considerably more warm-up time before they can accommodate passenger traffic. The young male watches with fascination as a troop of howlers conducts their morning commute across your shoulders, while you maintain the kind of serene indifference that suggests their presence is neither welcomed nor resented. It simply exists, like weather or gravity. "How do you stay so calm when they're being so inconsiderate?" he asks, apparently interpreting your response as supernatural patience rather than decades of practical experience with monkey management. "They're not being inconsiderate," you explain, adjusting your position to provide better footing for a particularly clumsy adolescent monkey. "They're being monkeys. Getting upset about monkeys acting like monkeys is like getting upset about water being wet. It's a waste of energy that could be better used for more productive purposes." This seems to be a revelation to your student, who has apparently been approaching interspecies interactions with the assumption that other animals should modify their behavior to accommodate his preferences. You spend the next week demonstrating various applications of strategic indifference, showing him how to remain pleasantly available without becoming a target for every creature with social needs or emotional drama. Your lessons in the 17 different meanings of capybara silence prove more challenging for him to master, partly because he hasn't developed the patience required for advanced nonverbal communication. He tends to fill quiet moments with unnecessary chatter, apparently uncomfortable with the kind of meaningful pauses that allow situations to develop their own natural resolution. Silence, you explain during one of your more formal educational sessions, isn't just the absence of noise. It's a form of communication that can convey everything from mild disapproval to profound contentment, depending on the quality of attention you bring to it. You demonstrate the difference between "I'm thinking about this," silence, and "I'm waiting for you to realize how ridiculous you're being," silence, followed by "I'm perfectly content and have no need for conversation," silence. Each variety requires different positioning, different breathing patterns, and different levels of environmental awareness. Your student practices diligently, though his natural talent for looking profoundly bored falls considerably short of your own hard-won expertise. His silences tend to look more like "I'm trying to be silent," rather than the effortless non-engagement that makes true capybara silence such an effective social tool. "It takes time," you assure him after a particularly unsuccessful attempt at dismissive silence that came across as confused attention. "I've been working on this for decades. You can't expect to master advanced indifference in a few weeks." By the end of his training, your protégé has a solid grasp of elder techniques, though without the calm assurance that only long experience brings. When he claims territory downstream, you're confident he'll manage with capybara dignity. Your reputation as a source of guidance has spread, drawing animals with all manner of life problems. You've developed a consultation style of patient listening, strategic humming, and advice that often amounts to, "Have you tried not doing the thing causing the problem?" This morning, a young otter confesses to social difficulties because she prefers fishing alone. You suggest that skill in something you enjoy can be more valuable than popularity. She leaves, reassured, having gained permission to prioritize her own nature. These sessions, now routine, distill decades of learning. Understand yourself, be patient, and remember that most problems fade if you do sensible things and wait. Commentary observes, you help others be themselves. That's the best wisdom there is. Elderhood brings physical adjustments, mourning, joint diplomacy, therapeutic swimming, and sunbathing, optimized for healing. Your routines balance maintenance with efficiency, offering lessons in grace to impatient youth who rush their swimming and grazing. You demonstrate the quiet art of moving deliberately, eating mindfully, and treating the ecosystem with respect. Your standing has grown. Caimans nod respectfully. Big Jim seeks your counsel, and younger animals defer to your judgment. Even human photographers linger. Speaking of your ancient wisdom, your protege visits for advice on grass quality, interspecies diplomacy, or weather signs. You teach him to read bird behavior, water temperature, and the subtleties of seasonal patterns. Passing on knowledge brings unexpected satisfaction. Its continuity beyond your lifetime. Daily life has settled into deep contentment. You wake when you please, eat what you like, and spend time with those who value your presence. One Tuesday offers perfect weather, tender grass, cooperative monkeys, and a productive consultation, proof that the best days are unremarkable yet complete. As the wet season arrives, you watch new life emerge, and young adults repeat the mistakes you once made. Your role is emeritus now, available for crises, but free to focus on what matters most. You've mastered living peacefully within your circumstances, turning the ordinary into quiet excellence. You haven't conquered territories or sought fame. Instead, you've contributed steadily to your community while preserving your essential nature. Floating in warm evening water, surrounded by familiar scents and sounds, you understand your greatest skill. Making a life magnificently, purposefully. Ordinary existence transformed into celebration. Tomorrow will bring another chance to practice this mastery, to show that living with presence and authenticity enriches both self and community. Tonight, you float in peace, knowing your life has been well lived in the rhythms of the wetlands you call home.